Hello. How are you doing this evening? I will say one thing that Norma said is quite correct. I got a BA in political science from Rutgers, and I was disappointed. This is a true story. Halfway through my time there, at the end of my sophomore year, they reorganized some of the departments, and political science went from being a Bachelor of Science to being a Bachelor of Arts. I had been waiting to get my BS in political science, and they took that away from me. So finally I was fed up and I said, I'm leaving this state. I'm going somewhere warm where the people are conservative. Well, thank you. How are you all doing today? So I am excited. Normally I don't get to be the opening act anymore. I don't get to be on the undercard and then sit down and shut up. But I'm excited to hear from Michael a little later. And I think the last time we were in a room together was the night Ted Cruz won his runoff against David Dewhurst. And we're sitting in the back of the room, or standing in the back of the room, as the guys who are involved in campaigns tend to be. We just stand back there and talk while the speeches are going on. And at one point, Ted went into his normal joke about how when he started the race, his name recognition was 2% and was a 3% margin of error. So, perhaps negative 1% of the people knew who he was. And then he threw something in that had never been in his remarks before. He said, when I started this race, I sought out my friend's advice, and my friend, a lot of my friends told me that they didn't think I could win. And they told me I was no way I could win. And I turned to Michael and I confessed, I told him he couldn't win. And he turned to me and said, I told him he couldn't win either. So the next time you get to thinking that I know a lot about politics, just disabuse yourself of that notion. I'm going to speak very briefly about, the original topic was sort of the convention. That's kind of 2 months old now, but I'll start with that because our state convention is the largest grassroots institution in the free world that I know of. The Texas Republican Convention is the largest convention, including the Republican and Democrat national conventions. We have more delegates and alternates than either of those two conventions in presidential years. Now, they have more people show up because they get about 40,000 members of the press, and we don't tend to get that. But we have more delegates, more people actually who get to be involved in deciding the fate of their party and their state. And how many of you have never been to a state convention? Those of you who haven't, you really need to, because they are set up so that you can have your say. And we vote on the floor of the convention. That's where we pick the state chairman. In a lot of states, they're picked by the gubernatorial nominee. They just go, that's who I want, and that's who it is. Other places, they vote on them in primaries like we do with our county chairs. But you get to decide, as a Republican grassroots person, who the chairman's going to be and the vice chair. You also get to decide all of your SREC people, the State Republican Executive Committee. Each Senate district sends a man and a woman who make all the policy for the party and help carry it out to hopefully help us get elected. And again, you get to decide that. It's not some back room full of cigar smoke, which we still have the back rooms, we don't have the cigar smoke. But it's not any of that, it's you. And the same thing is true of our party platform, of the rules. Everything that we do at the state level, you get to do just by showing up. And that's really the theme of what I want to talk about today, because politics really belongs to the people that show up and do the work. It is the ultimate meritocracy. It doesn't matter where you went to school. It doesn't matter how rich you are. What matters is whether you're willing to do the work and get out there and get people to come out. It is amazing that in a country where we've had countless men fight and die for our right to vote, most people really couldn't care less and don't bother and have to be persuaded to turn out. But get out the vote is our biggest effort, and it is the most time-consuming, it requires the most people, and it's how you win. And that is your role. You get to decide whether we're going to win the election, and whether at the state level we're going to have property tax relief, and whether we're going to have some sort of reasonable structure how we spend our money. You get to decide at the federal level who are going to be our members of Congress. In presidential years, who's going to be our Republican nominee, who's going to get our electoral votes in November. That happens when you go and either get involved with the party and do all of our tremendous things that we have to do and are highly technical and very expensive turnout efforts and all that, or whether you just go and get 10 of your friends to vote. If you get 10 people to vote, whether they're family members, people at your church, people that you work with, neighbors, if you get 10 people to vote who weren't going to vote, your vote just counted 10 times more than it was going to if you just went to your local school, hit the button, and went home. And that is the ultimate democracy. It's not just a question of having an election and then going home and hoping that your side prevails. It's that you get to decide, am I going to get out there and get my neighbors to vote? Am I going to get my friends to vote? Am I going to turn people out to make sure that we win? And I'll tell you something. The other side, they spend money to do it. They've got George Soros's money. They've got Michael Bloomberg's money. They've got all the money that Obama can raise. They've got all the money that his henchmen can raise. We have you. And so I'm asking you today to, if you care enough to come out to an event like this on a Tuesday night, admittedly mostly it's the Mexican food, but if you care enough to come out, you care enough to be involved. And if you care enough to be involved, that means you care how the country goes, how the state goes, how your county goes. You have the opportunity to make that difference, and you need to do it. Nobody can do it for you because they're doing it for themselves. They're getting out their 10 votes. You've got to get out yours. Now, this club is a great way to do it. You're going to all hear from, I don't think she's here today. Your I don't know what you call your political chair, but she's not here tonight, right? Hilda. Yeah, Hilda's not here today. Oh, where's Hilda? Oh, you're right. Well, sure, hide right in front of me. Hilda will be sending out emails, I'm presuming, to get y'all to opportunities to volunteer and to do things through the club. Of course, you can turn your hours in, very important for a club. You will have opportunity. I hear a lot of people say, well, you know, I don't know what I could do. This club will make sure you know what you can do. There are doors to be knocked on if you like knocking on doors. If you don't like going outside, there are phone calls to be made. There are emails to send. There's voter contact is and always has been the #1 way to get somebody to vote. You know, when Abraham Lincoln was organizing his political campaigns, he first set out to persuade everybody. Then he set out to, and he did it on index cards, or the 1860 equivalent, or 1850s equivalent of index cards, and he put down the names of all the people that were likely to vote for his party after he'd done his persuading, and he figured out who his likely voters were. And then he went on election day and turned them out. That's the same thing we do today. All the sophisticated computer equipment, all of the high-tech stuff, all the money that's spent, it comes down to the same thing Abraham Lincoln was doing. Figure out who's likely to vote for your people and get them to go out and vote. And just like then, the #1 way to get them to vote is personal contact. Now, the #1 way is personal contact from the candidate, and that's my job, to knock on as many doors as I can. But the #2 way is personal contact from other voters, from volunteers, from people in the neighborhood. If you go out and talk to somebody personally, you have a 10 times better chance of getting them to vote than if we just send them mail, they just hear radio ads, we see them on TV. That's all the air cover. But the ground war is fought by you going door to door, making the calls, going to headquarters and doing the work. That's what I need you to do, because I'd like to go back, because $600 a month for some strange reason seems to appeal to me. But if I could actually lose, I could go make a living, but that's another story. But there are things that the work never ends. And every time we think we got everything in good shape, there are people lining up ready to undo everything that we've done, ready to push back on against all of our freedoms, ready to try to turn this country into Europe. Now, why anybody would try to emulate a set of nations that used to control the entire world and are now so insignificant we don't even consult them before we do anything, why they aspire to turn us into that, I couldn't tell you, but they do. And we have got to stop them. And the only way to stop them is to win the elections and keep winning them. And so with that, I will sit down because I want to hear about a place where they don't let you do that, where you don't have the right or the ability to comment on your government, much less to determine who's going to run it. Here, it's your choice. If you don't do the work, or if you sit home and somebody else wins, you chose to do that. In North Korea, it's not your choice. So I want you to, when Hilda sends you an email, I want you to open it up. I want you to look at the opportunities. There is something for each one of you. If you don't like to knock on doors, I happen to be a nut about it. I've only had the cops called on me once. Only been bitten by a dog once. So really, I'm pretty good. If you like doing that, that's great. If you like putting out yard signs, that's terrific. If you prefer to talk to people on the phone, that's great. If you prefer to send out emails, we'll have you do that. If you like going out with a buddy and working the polls, we can have you do that. But at the end of the day, we need you to persuade enough people here to make sure that we don't turn back the clock. So thank you very much. Thanks for having me. And let's go on to November.
Okay, I will introduce our next speaker, but first I do want to mention that we have to have Michael Schofield and all the other great guys and gals back to get us a new Speaker of the House, and they have a plan for that. So I know y'all are excited to think we're not going to have Strauss again. And now I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Michael Docupel. Just a little bit about him. He is another lifelong Houstonian, as I am, and I know there's some other. How many native Houstonians do we have here? Raise your hands really high. That's great. Wonderful. How about native Texans? Okay, that's good too. That counts. Okay. We do welcome those who came as soon as they could, and y'all are really smart to do that. Michael has 4 children, David, Benjamin, Annabelle, and Jonathan. He co-founded SFC Capital Management in 1999, where he focuses on statistical arbitrage trading strategies, and I have no idea what that is. But he is the chair of the North Korean division of the Human Rights Foundation, began working with them with the Disrupt North Korea program in 2015 during a site visit to Seoul. And it was at this occasion he was able to meet numerous defector and refugee partner organizations and learn how he could be a part of that. And I'll let him tell you all about that. Thank you, Michael.
Hello. I'm so glad to be here with a group of people who wants to be engaged, involved, and get educated about the rest of the world. I think that's great. I'm here today to talk about North Korea. Now, normally when we talk about North Korea or we hear something about North Korea in the news, it's all about bombs and missiles and nukes and things like that. Today, I would like to focus on something other than those and the geopolitical questions. I'd like to focus on the people of North Korea. So one of the things that first got me interested in North Korea is, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but if I had one slide that I would show today, it would be the world at night. And so some of you have seen it. So it has, you can see where all the cities and all the people are all around the world. And, you know, Europe is just basically one big bright light, and the East Coast and the West Coast of the U.S., and then the Rocky. Well, South Korea is lit up like a Christmas tree. And then it's hard to tell because it looks like the ocean, it looks like an island, because just north of South Korea it's all black, except for this tiny little pale dot in Pyongyang, the capital. And then the ocean continues, what looks like ocean, to the Chinese border these days. And now the Chinese border is lit up as well. And so, to me, that is one of the most profound images. Looking at the Korean Peninsula at night is one of the most profound images there is. Because the only difference between the people in South Korea and the people in North Korea are the government. So, I want to talk about the people of North Korea and the government of North Korea today. And most importantly, a relatively small group, and I want this to be interactive, and so I'm going to try and talk for just a few minutes, and then do Q&A for as long as y'all like, because I usually find that people have all sorts of questions, and it leads the conversation in a much more interesting way. So, just to give you a little bit of background on North Korea. Basically, it's the last place where the Cold War exists. If you remember hearing anything about East Germany and West Germany and the way that that was divided, the same thing's true of North and South Korea today. In the North, it is governed by the Kim ruling family. First Kim Il-sung at the end of the Korean War, then Kim Jong-il, and now Kim Jong-un, his son. There are absolutely everything that you consider normal in your everyday life is not legal in North Korea. It is just remarkable. So there is absolutely no freedom of speech. There is no freedom of press. There is no freedom of religion. There's no freedom of movement. I mean, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that to move around inside North Korea, you need effectively what's called a visa. Effectively, you need a visa to visit the capital of Pyongyang. There are checkpoints along all the roads. You cannot just move around. Virtually no one has a passport, and virtually no one is allowed to leave the country. And there are a series of political prison camps that are reminiscent of the Soviet Gulag or a Nazi concentration camp minus the gas chambers. So there's approximately 150,000 people in these political prison camps around the country, and the best estimates are that about a quarter of the people are actually worked and killed in the camps before they leave. Now, what can get you sent to a prison camp? I mean, this is kind of like a game. I cannot possibly list all the things that can get you sent to a prison camp, but I'll attempt to list some. Listening to a K-pop South Korean song, watching a South Korean drama, watching any Hollywood movie, things that are criminal but probably wouldn't get you sent to a political prison include wearing blue jeans, having your hair cut in one of the unapproved styles. Dyeing your hair would definitely be, I mean, dyeing your hair would probably get you sent to a political prison. There is making a phone call out of the country. That would definitely do that. Saying the leader's name without prefacing it with something to the effect of Grand Marshal, Dear Leader, or whatever. Referring to him by his first name, definitely that would be considered a political crime. I could go on. Really, there is a very, very long list of things that you cannot do legally. It's just amazing, every time I pick up my cell phone, they do have cell phones, but those cell phones do not have, they're not smartphones. No one has access to the internet. I mean, approximately 10,000 North Koreans in total have access to the internet at all. And of course, and all of those are in computers and like government buildings where it's locked down and things like that. And then, but it's even that doesn't capture the pervasiveness of the police state. So there is essentially a caste system. I don't know if y'all are familiar with India and the caste system that used to be very much a part of Indian life and is still a part of it at some level today. But there's a caste system in North Korea, but it's called Songbun, and it is based upon your loyalty to the regime. There are three classes. There's loyal, there's wavering, and there's hostile. Now, this has all sorts of fun features. You can only go down. You can never go up. So you can go from loyal to wavering, but you cannot go from wavering to loyal. approximately 10% of the population is 10 to 15% of the of the population is classified as loyal, um, and um, this system governs virtually every aspect of your life. So only people who are loyal to the regime can live in the capital, Pyongyang. It determines where you go to school, what kind of job you can get, whether or not you can go to college or not, whether or not you, if you, the typical male is conscripted for 10 years, what level you will enter the military at. And where you live, remember, when you don't have freedom of movement around the country, where you live is a big deal because certain areas are poorer than other areas and certain areas are deprived of food. Food is used as a strategic weapon for political oppression in North Korea. The typical North Korean is 7 centimeters shorter than the typical South Korean. And again, these are people who had absolutely no genetic differences whatsoever prior to the separation between North and South. And so, hearing all of this, you might go, well, why don't they just leave? I mean, that would seem like a reasonable thing to do. In such a place. So essentially, there's only one way out of the country. The DMZ is the most fortified area, and only a handful of people have made it across the DMZ in the last 40 or 50 years. So there's one way out, and that's across the Tumen River into China. Now, once you're into China, you are not free. In fact, you are more danger than you were at home. The Chinese government will actually pays bounties for people to turn in North Korean defectors. They'll pay you $100 if you turn in a North Korean defector. And what happens is you get repatriated, sent back to North Korea, where the North Korean government goes, oh, you didn't like us. Guess what? That means you're going to a political prison camp. So if you want to get tortured and worked to death, is what happens if you get repatriated. So just to put rough numbers on it, so you have to make your way through China to Southeast Asia, down several thousand miles down to Thailand, where you can go to a South Korean embassy, where you'll be flown to Seoul, given South Korean citizenship, a stipend, some housing, all of these things. Very similar, if you remember anything about East Germany and West Germany, if you made it from the east to the west, you were given citizenship and whatnot. It's exactly the same with South Korea today. You might go, well, why don't they just go to the South Korean embassy or the American embassy in China? Well, they used to do that. In fact, in the mid-1990s, there were a number of North Korean defectors that made their way into like the Japanese embassy and the American embassy and things like that. And so the Chinese built walls around all of the embassies that would accept North Korean defectors, so that you have to go through a Chinese checkpoint in order to get to the American checkpoint. They can't mess with the American embassy, but they can build a wall around it so that you can't get to it. And so that's what they've done in China, which is why you can't escape that way. As a result, the vast majority of North Koreans that leave North Korea end up trapped in human trafficking situations in China. So about 1,200 a year make it from North Korea to South Korea, but there are approximately, nobody knows, but roughly 150,000 or so North Koreans trapped in China in human trafficking situations. So what does this mean? Well, 70% of the defectors are female, so that means they're married off to some highly undesirable Chinese man, or in a brothel, or these days on a webcam. And if they're males, they essentially are put to work. They're just modern day slaves. And if you complain, what happens? They take their $100 and they ship you back to North Korea, where you go to the gulag, not to be heard from again. So that's a pretty bad alternative, and as a result, Yeah. So those are your choices. So what can be done about it, and why am I telling you all of this? Well, one of the one of the interesting things is that I believe that there is actually something that private citizens can do. Unlike war situations where it's very difficult for ordinary citizens to get involved outside of the military, here I believe there is something that we can do. So, in order for there to be change inside North Korea, the first thing that has to happen, in my opinion, is that the North Korean people need to know what the outside world looks like. So right now, they just have this vague notion that China and South Korea are somehow wealthier than they are. But they have no real picture of what that looks like. I'll give you an example. I asked a recent defector not long ago what percentage he thought of North Koreans knew what an American supermarket looked like. And he said 0. I mean, they understand that, like, Americans aren't starving to death now, despite what their government tells them. And they recognize that, all this stuff now comes into their country that says made in China. So they get the idea that there's a lot of stuff in China. But they don't really have an accurate picture of what the world is like. And I personally just don't think the Berlin Wall would have ever come down if people in the East hadn't understood that life in the West was just a lot better. So I work on getting information into North Korea to allow the North Korean people to understand what the outside world looks like and to give them an accurate portrayal of the rest of the world. I don't do anything, I don't support any information dissemination that is what I would call overtly anti-North Korean. So it's not about telling them how awful and horrible their country is. It's about showing them how great and wonderful the rest of the world is, and how in the rest of the world you don't need a visa to go to the next city, and you're not afraid of being disappeared in the middle of the night and things like that. And so it's primarily just things like South Korean news programs, because in South Korea, just like the U.S., people get on the TV and they say, "I don't like the president," and they cannot imagine that sort of thing occurring in North Korea. And so just hearing a debate about what should be done and having people be for and against public policy issues. Recently, the South Korean president was impeached. I love supporting that kind of news programming, because the idea that the president could do something wrong and be removed from office and could end up in jail, these are like concepts that are completely foreign. So it's really just about opening up their view of the world. Now, a couple of things real quick, and then I'll wrap up and we'll start with the questions. But so do they get in trouble if they get caught with this? Absolutely. This is definitely the kind of thing that is literally life-threatening to possess. I think that speaks to the power of information. The fact that the Kim regime treats this so seriously, I think, and they try and clamp down on it, speaks to its effectiveness. They're not just randomly, arbitrarily making people's lives miserable. They intend to do it in order to stay in power. And this is one of the things that they think is necessary for them to stay in power. Usually one of the first questions I get is, well, how do you get people to take this stuff that is life-threatening? There is a tremendous demand for this information. There is just a thirst for it. Because, again, I'm trying to paint the picture of, you have to understand, they know something's wrong with the story they've been told, but they don't know what it is or what it's really like. Well, what does that do? All they want to do is learn more about everything. And so there is tremendous demand when we can get information into the hands of people. And so that's what I worked on doing. How do we do it? Um, there are thumb drives, USBs, little that you stick into your computer, or in North Korea they don't have computers, but they have all sorts of other electronic devices that have USB ports. So we smuggle those in. This year, to give you rough numbers, 3 years ago there's probably 5,000 done by all NGOs, non-governmental organizations combined. This year we should do the work I'm doing and the people that I'm supporting will do about 100,000. And then also we're starting with 1 terabyte external drives. These are 1 terabyte drives that cost like $60. I mean, you can buy them off Amazon. A terabyte holds more reading. If it's just text, it's more than you can read in a lifetime. If it's audio, it's pretty much all you could possibly listen to in a lifetime. And in video, it's hundreds and hundreds of hours of video. I mean, as I was telling somebody earlier, it literally takes hours to click through all the titles of all of the things that are on a 1 terabyte drive. I mean, I just cannot emphasize how much information it is. And again, they don't have computers hardly at all, but they have these things. There's a variety of devices. Most of them are called no-tells, and they're basically like, if you think of a mid-90s portable DVD player or something like that you used to see like on airplanes with like a little flip top. They have those, but they have USB ports that they can plug these external drives into and then access the information and watch the videos and things like that. So that's what I work to do. And again, I don't think it's going to solve all the problems overnight, but I am a fan of opening their eyes to freedom and liberty and democracy, and of trying to change the situation on the ground with the North Korean people. I think we can win the conflict in North Korea the same way we won the Cold War. It's a war of ideas. It's not a war of bombs. We didn't nuke Moscow. We just created enough pressure and let the people know what the outside world looked like so that they demanded access to those goods and services that we take for granted today. So with that, I will take questions. Go right ahead.
How did you get involved with this? Are you related to people in South? Can you go into North Korea just like you want to? Or how do
You didn't recognize Dokupil as a Korean name? I'm just kidding. No, it is. I'm not Korean. I have no Korean relatives or ancestry or anything like that. I consider North Korea to really just be the worst place on the planet. It combines a police state and absolute poverty in a way that is just very offensive to me, and I just consider it wrong. And I decided I was gonna figure out what I could do about it. And to my shock and dismay, essentially, I mean, I cannot tell you how little dollars are spent on helping the North Korean people versus any other philanthropic cause. Total budget for all NGOs that do anything to help the North Korean people is maybe $5 million a year. And I'm adding up every single organization. Most of those are focused on refugee rescues. That's where over half those dollars are, which I'm all for and support. Don't get me wrong, but it costs roughly $10,000 to get a person out of China and to South Korea, and it's just a very, it's not, it doesn't bring about systemic change in a quick way. So there's just no one doing anything, and I was like, that's ridiculous. We can do stuff.
Okay, you do it from here?
Yeah. I could go to North Korea once. I mean, it's Hotel California or something like that. I can check out any time, but I could never leave.
Please raise your hand when you have a question, and we're going to have a beautiful woman come around and put the mic up to your mouth so they can ask their question.
Yeah.
have, or do they believe in a mandatory family, or is birth control mandatory? This is what I'm trying to get at.
Family size is pretty small in North Korea. I mean, it's right at replacement rate, roughly two.
So do they tell them how many they can have?
No, there's actually not been. It's not like China where there was a one-child policy or something like that. There's not a whole lot of emphasis on either having lots of children or not having children or anything like that.
So, if a person hates it so much, why add children to the fact?
Well, I mean, I think that's why, for their income level, they have a very low birth rate. You know, if you look around the world, and North Korea is an outlier if you plot it income versus birth rate or total fertility rate. Nick.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't understand the methodology in getting a terabyte when they're limited into the amount they can listen to without getting caught. It would seem like the smaller to more people would be more effective than this
Well,
huge terabyte to limited number.
Well, so a couple of things. That's a very great question. A couple of things. I think both is really the answer, not one or the other. One of the things that I'm hoping to do, so I'll tell you a story. There's a great documentary that y'all can watch if you have Netflix or something like that. It's called Communism, Chuck Norris versus Communism. And it's about the underground VHS tape market in Romania in the mid-1980s and how that facilitated the revolution against Ceausescu in '89. Romania was actually the first place to actually start this whole process going. And how it's just a great documentation of how access to information and whatnot spread the desire for freedom. So, getting back to the exact point of your question of a terabyte versus USBs. So what I'm hoping with the terabyte drives, one, there's many fewer. I can't do 100,000 1 terabyte drives. I mean, if I had the resources, I promise you I would. But what I'm hoping and what I do is I give them a 1 terabyte drive and 100 blank USBs. And I'm hoping to start little businesses. Now, will they all start little businesses? No, they won't. But if 5% of them, 10% of them do, because that's how the information ultimately spread in Romania, was through these people becoming black marketeers and making hundreds of copies. This one guy that they talk about, he made a house every single day in money making copies of videotapes. And so that's what I'm hoping that they'll see eventually, is the ability to rent out. So if you have a terabyte drive, anytime somebody wants to watch something new, if they've got a thumb drive, you know, they give you 50 cents or whatever, $1, and you can load up their thumb drive and hand it back to them and give them new content to watch. So that's one of the purposes of the larger drives. Sorry. And then I think they want the mic.
Can you just give me an idea, just the demographics? What's any idea what the total population is? Is the population trending younger, trending older, all the way down to what do you got? Infant mortality rate? What's the deal? I need some information like that.
Yeah, sure. So 25 million people, roughly. I would say fairly steady. I mean, total fertility rate's something like 2.2, something like that. So pretty steady in population. It's not a particularly aging population or non-aging. I mean, they not that well educated in the aggregate. There's a lot of most of the education is focused on what they call Kim-Il-sungism. I mean, basically the ideology of the dear leader. So fairly uneducated, and most North Koreans have a very difficult time integrating into South Korean society. That's something we didn't talk about, but that kind of gives you an idea that they're not prepared for the sort of global workforce. Does that help? And
It would seem since the 50s in North Korea has almost been a family affair in a sense, father, son, father, son. The current leader, is he married? And does he have children? And does he have a disease yet? You know.
So it's really interesting on many different levels. I'll talk just a little bit about the Kim family. So Kim Il Sung fought against the Japanese before he fought the Americans. He is something of a true hero to the North Korean people. I mean, he's sort of Patton and Eisenhower and George Washington all wrapped into one. And then they've created this enormous cult of personality around him. But if even without that, they would be a tremendous amount of respect for Kim Il Sung. And Kim Jong Il, his son, took about 20 years of the last 20 years of Kim Il Sung's life, where he slowly got promoted into more and more important roles, and a lot of sort of Kim Il Sung's halo rubbed off on Kim Jong Il, and so Kim Il Sung had a tremendous amount of respect as well as a tremendous amount of fear. Kim Jong Il had a lot of respect and a lot of fear. Kim Jong-un has essentially no respect and only fear. So Kim Jong-un, now the North Korean people don't know all of this. For instance, he killed his half-brother Kim Jong-nam in Malaysia. They don't know about that. I mean, that's just one of the things they don't know about. His mom was born in Japan. Now, I don't know if you all know this or not, but if you're Korean, having a Japanese mother is like a big bad thing. You don't want to have that. Nobody knows that. I mean, that is like a state secret, and I'm not joking. He is from an illegitimate wife of Kim Jong Il, so they don't know about his mother at all. She's never talked about in public. He was never talked about in public until less than 24 months before he took power. He's the third eldest son. So the eldest son was Kim Jong-nam. Everyone thought he would be the leader. He did a bad thing. He went to Disneyland Japan on a fake ID. Dad found out about it, and he was exiled. And then Kim Jong-un had him killed. The second eldest son has only been seen in public a handful of times. He's thought to be a drug addict and incapable of functioning. And so then it came down to Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un has no military experience, and he just doesn't have the level of respect that both his father and grandfather had.
How old is he?
Well, I mean, again, I know this sounds bizarre, but nobody knows. I mean, his date of birth hasn't been announced. It'll probably have he's roughly 32. Right. But I mean, literally nobody knows. It wasn't like his birth was announced. They'll do some sort of special celebration creation around his date of birth and make it a national holiday at some point.
Does he have a wife?
He is married. We don't know about children. We believe he has 1 or 2 kids. This is why it's so easy to become an expert on North Korea. Nobody knows anything.
These DVD players with USB ports.
Mm-hmm.
What about what percentage of households have these devices, and then what about other devices for reception of information? Like people have television sets. Can they access, if they're near the border, can they access South Korean television? What about AM or shortwave radios? Do people have receivers where they can get South Korean broadcasts? And what about the Voice of America, which has broadcasted around the world in multiple languages to convey information to other people?
Okay, a lot of questions there. Okay, shortwave radio definitely exists. Voice of America broadcasts on shortwave radio. It is definitely being broadcast in. Shortwave radios, I've tried to get people to take shortwave radios. They're really hard to get people to take. And it's because basically the only reason why you have a shortwave radio is to listen to Voice of America or Radio Free Asia or some other subversive content. And you're listening to, I don't know if any of y'all have used shortwave radio, but it's very tinny. It's like AM radio, and it's staticky, and you can pretty much only listen at night, and it's kind of a mess. And so it's not a high value proposition. You're risking your life to listen to tinny propaganda from Voice of America.
But a standard 50,000 watt power station can be heard, well, on flatland 1,000 miles at night, and Korea, and it's not flat, of course, but I'm sure if there's a station that powerful that most of the peninsula can get it.
So there are, so on TV, there's a whole slew of issues. One, unfortunately, there's just not a lot of the population center is near the DMZ. And two, there's a lot of mountains, which is unfortunate as well, just in terms of reception. Essentially, there's also some technological details that I don't want to bore everyone with, but essentially, very few people are actually capable of receiving South Korean TV. Now, the Chinese border, it's totally different. There's real population there, and they do actually, a fair number of people do watch Chinese television. Problem is, it's in Chinese. They don't speak Chinese. They still watch it anyways, and try and pick up something because they're just thirsty for information. The border region has become kind of a different area. Now, you also ask about TVs. So, yes, all of the modern TVs from China also have USB ports. And they do have those. They only are allowed to watch North Korean television, but they're allowed to have them, and they have USB ports. So, yes, they're getting more and more of those. That's why I just said electronic devices, because there's a number of those kinds of things. There's also what are called like MP4 players, which are basically like old iPods that have a little screen that's like that big. They have little cards called SD micro cards that they can stick in there. They can watch those, use those as well. And
Two questions. One, what happened to his mother, his Japanese mother? And second, is this bit? Oh,
yes.
yeah. What happened to the Japanese mother?
Mm-hmm.
And the second is, with everything being so tightly controlled, how do you get these devices? How do you infiltrate those devices into the country?
Yeah. So, you know, I hate to say, I'm like almost completely positive that she passed away a number of years ago. Nothing. She lived in North Korea. I'm just not 100% on that. It's been a while since I've actually focused on that. I can tell you a fun little story about Kim Jong-un growing up that I could in just a moment. But I want to answer your second question, which is how do you get them in? So, one, you know, if you see the documentary Chuck Norris versus Communism, you'll see. I mean, there's just underground markets and black markets for all sorts of things. Everything is illegal in North Korea. And so, you know, I mean, you are supposed to have a job at a factory that's supposed to, that pays you like literally maybe, you know, $10 a month or something like that. And that's supposed to provide you for your income. So everyone has second jobs that are illegal in order to provide food for themselves. There was a whole system of food distribution up until the mid-1990s. And there was a bad famine that killed between 5 and 10% of the population. And basically there was kind of a spontaneous marketization where people just started all breaking the law so that they didn't starve to death. And so as a result, it's kind of more, so I tell people North Korea is some sort of combination between Jonestown and The Sopranos. Because it's kind of, it has doomsday cult aspects, and there's such a strong cult of personality, but it's really at its core a mafia state. I mean, everything is against the law, and so nothing's against the law, and so everything is just paid for with bribes and things like that. I mean, one of the sources of hard currency for years for the North Korean government, they just set up a big freaking meth factory and started selling it to the Chinese. And it's just like, oh, well, we can make meth. there's a market for that. And so, I mean, like, that's the mentality of the government. I mean, like, drugs illegal? Yeah, they're illegal, but whatever. I mean, it's a government-run meth factory. And so, you know, that's the kind of mentality they have. I do want to give just I'll go back to the Kim Jong-un question, because I know with the mother, that's kind of what you were going for. I mean, first of all, I can't imagine what it's like to be Kim Jong-il's son. I mean, that sounds really horrific just to start out with. The guy was educated in Switzerland, okay, for a number of years. When he was there, he was with his aunt, his mother's sister's family, and that's who he stayed with. When he had to go back to North Korea, that family defected to the UK. So the only family that he had known left and went to the enemy. And so it's like, and then he was always, I mean, he was literally the bastard child, okay? And so, like, he was never groomed to be the heir apparent or anything like that. He was never supposed to be really even a part of the government or acknowledged by the government. That's how we don't know how old he is, because his birth was never announced. Because he never existed. They literally found, there's all sorts of testimony from defectors who were high ranking, who were like, yeah, it was like 18 months before he took power that I first heard that he existed and that his name was, and they started referring to him as Marshall, and they were like, who is this Marshall? Like, I mean, like, they had no idea. And it took a long time to even figure out, like, who his mother was, and I'm talking about very high-ranking North Koreans who were sitting around the table with Kim Jong-il deciding what to do. Does that help with?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to know how tight North Korea is with China.
Well, that's a very interesting question. Wow. What do you mean exactly? Because I could expound on that in a lot of different directions. Can you, like, are they buddy? Are they?
Do they talk? Do they have their own type of buying things from China,
Okay.
and buying things from North Korea, and have a market together?
Yes. So, essentially, 100% of North Korea's trade is with China. Everything that was ever manufactured that exists in North Korea was made in China. So all of the trade comes through essentially one Chinese town called Dandong. And that's where it all comes from. And North Korea's exports, whether it be meth or coal or iron ore, typically all go to China and a few other sort of outlaw nations like Iran and places like that. They're not particularly close anymore. So back in the day, I mean, when Kim Il-sung wanted to invade South Korea and start the Korean War, he got Mao's blessing and Stalin's blessing. This is all well documented after the fall of the wall. All of these documents became public. And so there was a real tightness, and of course the whole reason why North Korea exists is because the Chinese ultimately came in and backed them. So historically there was a very strong relationship between these two countries. Post '89, it really broke apart because China went so far down the market reform system, North Korea did not, and then the Soviet Union fell, and they had been receiving a lot of subsidies from the Soviet Union as well, and that all went away. And it's really been an isolated rogue nation since then.
There's one market that they probably are both working with, and those are human body parts. Are you familiar with that?
I'm certainly familiar. One of the things that's fun or interesting or whatever, I don't know what about doing a lot of human rights work is that I end up talking to human rights activists from around the world, and I've learned so much about so many different places. I'm definitely familiar with what all China does these days, and know a number of people who are not allowed to be there despite being Chinese because of the work that they've done publicizing that. I don't think North Korea does a whole lot of that. It actually takes a lot of planning and like structure and governance, and it's just not that well run. I haven't heard a lot of stories about that, and I don't think a whole lot of it happens. The state of medical facilities is also just atrocious there. I mean, the hospitals don't have power, they don't have anesthesia. I mean, defectors all the time will tell stories of, getting amputations without anesthesia, things like that. I mean, so it's just not developed enough to do that. I know that sounds bad, but
We know China's very developed in that.
Yeah. What can you tell us about the underground Christian movement there?
so one of the things I didn't, that I neglected to mention is essentially the only people in China who help North Korean defectors. All the safe houses are run by Chinese Christians, most of whom are of Korean descent, but they're actually Chinese. That community has created an underground railroad in China to get them to Thailand. That is how the 1,200 get out every year. There is very little underground church in North Korea. At one point in time, Pyongyang was the capital of Christianity in the Korean Peninsula. There's all sorts of other old stories about that. But these days, any religious text at all is very serious political crime. There's no way to bribe your way out of that. And it has really kept the church. You might, if you get on the internet, you might see pictures of a church in Pyongyang. I couldn't make it up if I tried. I promise you, those people are actors. It is all a complete and total joke. It is not real. It is a complete show. It is. So do not believe that there is any sort of open church in North Korea. I promise you, no one believes that that is actually true.
What we've heard is that they end up in prison if they get caught.
Oh, absolutely. No doubt about it. How are we doing on time here? We're doing.
Thank you. And I would like to show my respect to what we are doing. And this most effective way to change the country, the people, and is to provide information, outside information to them. This is what we have been doing for past 18 years, our media. And personally, I worked for more than 10 years every night on internet, send Chinese people anti-blocking software. And the people just double click and can access the outside world. Right now, more than millions every day Chinese people use that software outside. And we use satellite, TV, and radio. And also, one important thing I mentioned, I think that will work to let people in North Korea to distribute what you pass in. And we have a book, our published book, April Times. It's called 9 Commentaries on Communist Party. That is the book. It said it's a book disintegrate Chinese Communist Party. And we send this to China. The many underground printing company print the book out. Soon, the many Chinese speakers got the book, and it triggered 300 million Chinese people denounce, quit Communist Party organizations. So I appreciate that. That's just our experience, and we have done all individuals do this based on our heart. Every individual's heart doing that. So I appreciate information.
One more thing to ask a historical perspective. It's going to be kind of an opinion on your part. Suppose back in the 1950s, when the controversy came up between our President Truman versus General MacArthur, and what MacArthur was proposing with the bridges over the Yalu River. He wanted to wipe them out, and consequently, conceivably, had he been allowed to move from a military standpoint, conceivably the Korean War would have ended with a unified country and not a divided one. An opinion, am I asking you?
First, just a disclaimer: my expertise is not geopolitical situation. I do consider myself an expert on the North Korean people today and whatnot. Having said that, why not pontificate? I was a poli-sci major. I don't really. I think the Korean War is a very difficult thing, and it was done in the context of the Cold War. Here's what I can say. From 1994 to today, the U.S. government has done, and the European governments have done, absolutely nothing to promote freedom in North Korea. And for the life of me, I do not understand it. Clinton, Bush, Obama, no money. I mean, shockingly small dollars. And so actually last year I did get a grant for $600,000 from the State Department to do some of this work. And so, it's a laughably small sum of money. I don't know, what is it, 1 minute of the State Department's budget? Maybe 1 second of the State Department's budget? I don't know, but it's laughably small. But I had a meeting with a person who's been there a long time, career bureaucrat, but relatively high up, and I asked, why don't y'all do anything about North Korea? There's no money going to this. This is a joke. And I believe I got the truth. She said, well, we can't measure its effectiveness. And it's true. They want to know things like who gets what and who watches what and how many people saw it. Well, that can't be answered. There's here and there have been little efforts, but in the aggregate, there's been no concerted effort to open up the country. And to me, this is a great role for private citizens to fill, because it is not, you do not need governmental policy to change to open up the country. And this is something that the confluence of technology has really made available. Thumb drives that can hold movies, these didn't exist 10 years ago, and if they did, they were prohibitively expensive. 1 terabyte drives, I can't even imagine. All of these things that we're doing today were completely cost prohibitive even 10 years ago. And so there's just an opportunity to deny the Kim regime's desire to keep their people in ignorance. And we can thwart that, and we can stop that. So,
as he seems to be very effective at keeping them ignorant, what is the groundswell of the citizenry in North Korea to want to make change? Like you say, the ones that leave have a hard time incorporating into South Korea. So that tells me that the intelligence level, as you just said, is pretty low from the population. So are they kind of just, it's miserable, but I'm too dumb to really know how miserable I am?
Well, the fancy schmancy term is theory of change. What's your theory of change? How are you going to change North Korea? So the way I view it is that the first thing that has to take place is that they have to understand that there's a reason to change. If you just have some notion that South Korea is richer, that's not really going to encourage you to make any sort of demands of change. And so that's why I believe information dissemination is the first step. After that, I would say the next phase of what I would like to do is help build a civil society inside North Korea. So increase North Korean communication, allow North Koreans to talk to one another. So when there are floods in the north of North Korea, when the river floods, people in Pyongyang don't know it. When 5 to 10% of the population starved to death in the late 90s, literally there were defectors who left Pyongyang and made it to South Korea and learned about the famine that had occurred in their own country. So one, provide them access to information about the outside world. Two, increase intra-communication inside North Korea. That's the other reason why I love smuggling in these USBs and terabyte drives, because they facilitate any content that North Koreans create. These devices facilitate their dissemination inside the country that I'll never know about, and I won't have any plan or agenda of doing. And so that's kind of how I see it evolving. And it doesn't matter to me. I don't care if Kim Jong-un stays in power forever. It doesn't really matter to me. What I care about is what the experience of the North Korean people is. I don't think he's real likely to change, and I think that it probably means that it's necessary to have a revolution. That's not my business. That's their business. I provide them with access to information. I facilitate their communication, and I let them take care of the details.
Yes, I was wondering if you could describe, if you know, the thought processes from someone that has no idea of what democracy is and that there's anything better than their own country, and getting exposed to this information and how they come to conclusions.
Yeah, so, one of the things that's on the terabyte drives are a number of documentaries. Many of them are global in nature, just trying to get away from American and South Koreans, which they've been taught for so long are the enemy. And when you have some guy from Finland talking about what it means to have a prime minister, it just doesn't have this like propaganda feel to it. And so one of them is a documentary where it talks to people all around the world about what they expect from their president, what they expect from their prime minister, what they expect from their government, and what it means to them. And so there's stuff like that. We also there's some just basic education on like, what does the American government look like? What is the South Korean? There are 3 branches of government. There's judicial, there's the executive, stuff like that. Just getting them to think about stuff. And then the other thing that I personally think is in some ways more important than the democratic aspect and is the human rights aspect. The idea that there are inherent unalienable rights that every human being has, and that most people around the world today actually ascribe to those beliefs. And certainly you get to experience that in South Korea or the US and other places around the world. And so that concept of human rights, that there are inherent rights that you have as a human being, is very foreign, and I think that information along those lines is actually very effective. Having said all of that, I really don't want to underestimate Hollywood. Seriously, Hollywood is a big deal in terms of just whether it's the Hunger Games, which apparently I've never actually seen the Hunger Games. I really need to watch it, but I'm told they have this a very similar setup or whatever, and then they're also so glossy and they're so well made that they make North Korean TV just look awful, and so it's very helpful in that regard as well. Just the production quality, things like that. It's impossible not to tell the difference. All right. We'll do. Yeah, so all the males, assuming
Is it
you're
just
not,
males?
It's
just
so some of the females, but all of the males go, and they're actually conscripted for 10 years typically. But don't think that everyone who's in the military is happy. Most of these people are hungry too. There's because the Songbun, the ranking of. If you're in the military and you're not considered loyal to the regime, you're going to be in some outpost in the middle of nowhere where you're not given any food, you're not given a gun, you're not given anything, and it's very unpleasant. And fortunately, some of these people happen to be border guards, and happen to be amenable to facilitating my work.
Did you ever hear anything about Otto Warmbier?
So Otto, obviously a completely tragic situation. Actually, I have an individual who I work with who's a North Korean defector who is currently with his dad, actually. I don't think we'll ever know what happened in that situation. It's just impossible to know. It's too opaque, and it's really unfortunate. I'll say this: it is really a bad idea to go to North Korea. Not only do you have the Otto circumstance of maybe he did something, maybe he didn't. Who really knows? But even more than that. This is one of the things you might not have thought about that a North Korean defector told me. So when you go to North Korea, you have to go on the pre-approved tour, and you go around with minders, and you're never allowed to actually have an open conversation with anybody there or anything like that. But one of the things they do is they drive you up to the Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il statues, and they effectively make you bow before them. And they're like, oh, come on, you got to bow so we can move on. And they put pressure on you to do that, and so essentially everyone does. Well, what they don't tell you is that they're videotaping you, and that night on TV, and every night on TV, they go, look at all these people who came all around the world. They came from this country and this country and this country, all to worship our dear leader. Well, he didn't go to North Korea. And so that being used as propaganda, you cannot stop yourself from being used as propaganda. There are some organizations that try and do work inside North Korea. I do not support that work because, again, you can't control the conversation about what takes place. And you're like, oh, well, I'm digging a well and helping people have clean water. And it's like, that sounds like a really good idea, but literally you have no idea what they're going to do with it. They could dump poison in the well and tell them that you poisoned them. I mean, like, there is no end to the possibilities, and they regularly utilize foreigners for their benefit. They publish a kill list. My joke, which is actually true, is I'm not on the kill list, but I'm Facebook friends with people who are. So I'm sitting here in Houston, Texas. I'm pretty far removed. I have a fair amount of concern for my electronic safety, but not my physical safety.
Who's next?
Was somebody? Did?
Oh.
I have a similar question to what you were just talking about. I just wondered how you're staying alive.
Yeah, so I mean, the North Korean government hasn't really killed Americans or anything like that outside of North Korean soil. So I'm not, the people I work with and the people who do so the North Korean secret police definitely operate freely inside China, and I mean, they will and have killed North Korean defectors inside China. They have also captured them as prisoners and taken them back to North Korea. So the people that I work with who do that work, they are very much putting their physical lives at risk. Like I say, sitting here in Houston, Texas, I'm feeling pretty good.
You had mentioned tourism and tourists, but I mean, who goes there to North Korea on a tour?
Yeah, so
countries?
I forget what I forget what somebody had a snarky term for it, but essentially people who, I mean, it's just considered edgy. I mean, there's always somebody who wants to do something like that. There's just no point to going. You can't learn anything by going. having said that, if you're a journalist or something like that, journalists have managed to do a few interesting things and whatnot. So, but any just ordinary citizen, there's just no reason to go. Okay.
For people like us to help our community, what
So,
money you need?
yeah. So, if you want to volunteer and go to the Chinese border, learn Mandarin and Korean, and become part of the smuggling network, I'm available afterwards. I'm happy to talk to you, assuming that that's not how you wish to become involved. It's taking block walking really seriously, folks. Okay. So I work with an organization called the Human Rights Foundation. That's hrf.org, humanrightsfoundation.org, hrf.org. If you go to that website and you put in North Korea and you give $10, that comes to me and I will put it to work. So yes, what I need more than anything else are resources. But yeah, you can go to hrf.org and make a donation. Just indicate they do work all around the world. I do all the North Korea stuff. If you put that it's for North Korea, it'll be for North Korea.
But you're actually yourself involved in making these devices.
So No. So I provide what I call strategic planning and advice and whatnot. I figure out what we're going to do, how we're going to do it. I help curate the content and go over those sorts of things. And then a lot of the organizations that we work with are not, just say they didn't go to get a Harvard MBA. They're North Korean defectors who are well-meaning, but they don't really understand how to run an effective organization. So I work with them to do that. What are metrics of success? If you want to raise money from an American audience, you should have a website that's in English. Americans aren't going to go to a Korean language website and donate money. Things like that. And so I work with a lot of that sort of thing. So I just help all of these organizations, and then I raise money and give money to facilitate all this. Alrighty, well I think we're about out of time. I really do appreciate y'all being interested and asking all those great questions. It's something I care a lot about, and I really do hope that y'all will continue to read North Korea stories with a slightly different light, and if you're interested in getting more involved, I'm happy to talk to you afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you.